It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome into an episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Alan, we said in the month of April we'd like to have, one of our draft gurus on here quite a bit throughout the month of April, and we got one right below us on the screen. Derrick Bell joining the show again. Derrick, what's up, pal?
Draft guru, man. That's a new one. I like that.
I'm willing to use that.
Very high praise.
Yes.
I'm excited to talk some ball, man.
Alan, I know you share the sentiment. I think guru was appropriate.
Guru's perfect, or whatever else we can come up with works too.
Aficionado.
We've got some draft talk coming, and we're going to talk about the wide receiver position. I'm excited to have this conversation with Derrick because I feel like this is the position that maybe I feel like the least clear about the Steelers' intentions in this draft, and just in the number of ways they can go. Got to knock some news of the day out of here very quickly, though. Smitty, what do you got at the top of your list there?
Well, to be honest with you, we knew that these signings were coming down the pipeline last week, but the one that kind of took me by surprise a little bit, I will say, Dean Lowry getting 2 years as opposed to 1. What do we make of this? I don't know if you've seen the structure of the contract, but I haven't. Is it the money's going to be in year 1 really and make it cuttable? Is there some insurance in terms of who they could potentially lose along that defensive line next year in free agency? What do you think is the reason that he's getting 2 years here?
It's funny because I knew he was a veteran and drafted way back in 2016. So, I mean, in terms of the NFL world, that's old. So, but he's only 29. So I guess he was a young guy coming out. Defensive lineman can play a long time. I wouldn't be concerned about 2 years for that guy, but he did have pretty significant injury last year. So it's taking on some risk. It basically means that there's some guaranteed money in this. Right, that's the only reason to do 2 years. It means it's not going to be one of these veteran salary cap benefit deals like we've seen them sign with, guys like Quan Alexander over the years, where it's going to be kind of a 1 year on the cheap kind of deal. Right, this is going to be for some money. I think it sort of solidifies my earlier take that the intention is that this is their replacement for Armand Watts in that pass, sort of upfield D tackle rotation when they're in that the 4-man front. He'll probably be, I guess, what would that make him? 5th after Cam and Larry and Mon Adams and Keanu Benton, right? And so I mean, it wasn't a big role. Armand Watts, I think he averaged 20 snaps a game last year, but he played really well, and I think he was an important part worth fixing. I don't think the fact that, when we said they signed Dean Lowry, I don't think that chased me away from them being interested in defensive tackle in this draft. And I don't think it being a 2-year deal really changes that for me either.
Sure. And Derrick, I'd like to get your thoughts on Dean Lowry as a player. We haven't had you on here. We haven't talked about this signing at all, but as somebody, I know that you really liked Armand Watts. So losing him to the Patriots in free agency, is this a, somewhat sufficient replacement? What's the fit along the defensive line and just overall how you feel about him being brought in?
Yeah, I went back and watched just one game from last year and then one game from the year prior. Just to get a kind of a general feel for how he was as a player. But, I'm not really sure I was actually kind of higher on the Watt signing last year when they made it because I went back and watched his tape from the 2 years prior, and he was pretty impressive. And like Alan said, I thought he had a pretty good season last year for the Steelers off the bench. Ideally you want to be 5-6 deep on the defensive line because, you're going to just the attrition factor over the course of the season. Guys get banged up. Of course, we saw that with Cam last year. Even though the Steelers have, 3 solidified starters, I think add a vet to the room. Alan mentioned, he's going to be 30 this year. So add another vet, a 2-year deal, definitely going to be some guaranteed money. That probably makes him a roster lock, in my opinion, and probably one of the first guys off the bench. You just look at kind of Lowry's game. A couple seasons ago, I think it was 2021, was his best season of his career. Green Bay. I didn't go back and watch this far away, but 42 pressure, 6 sacks, according to Pro Football Focus. So, there's some ability there. He stuck around the league, a long time. So this guy's a former 4th-round pick. So I think quality depth, but it wouldn't scare me away necessarily from adding a guy if you really like somebody on day 2 or day 3 of the draft. It's just with the Steelers, we're going to talk about the receiver position on the episode, but with the Steelers having some pretty glaring needs at some pretty important spots, it's kind of hard. They've kind of almost backed themselves into almost needing to put defensive line depth on the back burner kind of at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come back to the receivers, but we can wait on those ones because it's going to tie into the rest of the conversation. The other piece of news that we had was the Steelers took out to dinner. Last week we talked about the Alabama cornerbacks. Like Taylor put them through the drills. Kool-Aid McKinstry, as well as Terry and Arnold. Mike Tomlin went to dinner with those two. Invited Dallas Turner along for the ride as well to go to dinner. But really, those two cornerbacks potentially. I think there's a world where that one of those guys could be the pick, right? Like, say that things fall, Alan. We did a mock draft on Friday. We saw how weird things could fall in different scenarios. Say there is a huge run on tackles and the centers, they just don't really see the value there. Maybe the wide receivers aren't in play. There's a world there where a cornerback could be the first round pick. So, what do we make of this? Does this surprise us at all? And Derek, what is your take on those two corners from Alabama?
I'll let Alan go first.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that they're interested, right? I mean, we knew they were interested in these guys. They sent Ike there. We knew he was there already. So, I mean, the fact they took him out to dinner, I mean, look, they took Nate Wiggins out to dinner too, and he's the only first-round pick from Clemson. They were all over Quinyon Mitchell at the Senior Bowl. Like, they're showing interest in these first-round corners. I'm not really sure that, it's going to line up that way for me. I think corner and tackle are very much positions where, like, they don't absolutely have to get a guy, but this is a deep first round at those positions, and they will be able to get a player at 20 that you usually can't get at 20. I mean, just like me personally, I think I would rather have the tackle, but certainly corner is a position of need for them. They even after bringing in Jackson from Carolina, he's on the last year of his deal. They don't have anybody that's played the slot, so guys like Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Wiggins, and Arnold are all like guys that maybe could play some inside and some outside. I think that would be really useful to them. So I see tackle and corner pretty equal in terms of just these are positions where, look, if they had to go play today, would they be able to fill the lineup? Yeah, but that's positions where they need like long-term upgrades. Those are big-time value positions in the first round. That's what Omar Khan is all about. And so I think the obvious in those two positions, or the interest in those two positions is obvious. I'm not sure that we'll get both of them checked. Like if it doesn't happen early for tackle, it might not happen at all. If it happens later for corner, it might just be a slot guy. But I mean, these guys are great. And Derek wrote an awesome piece, actually linked to it in today's story earlier this offseason, breaking down the differences between Arnold and McKinstry and how their fit is for the Steelers. So I recommend you check that out. But Derek, I mean, I assume, the news is not groundbreaking that the Steelers are interested in these two guys.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about just the long-term kind of outlook of both those positions, tackle and corner. I think Diontae Jackson and then Dan Moore, those are kind of like one-year stopgaps. I feel like, both positions that you kind of prefer to upgrade on in the short term and really get a guy for the long term. But, just kind of like my thoughts, Terrion Arnold's been my CB1 since I believe like October, November-ish, and that really hasn't changed. I think with Arnold, man, he had such an incredible season this past year, really put himself on the map. He, I think had kind of like day 3 or round 3 stock coming into the season. He just exploded, man. Like, I think so explosive, click and close ability. He's a playmaker, makes plays on the football, turns the ball over. Just from an athleticism standpoint, like, this is what you want. Inside, outside versatility. The guy's, he's a very unique mover in terms of like change of direction. And then like Kool-Aid, like, I feel like he's been a guy that everybody's talked about for so long. And when you're a freshman, you start for a Nick Saban defense. I mean, I think that speaks like volumes to like, your ability to come in and play at the SEC level as like an 18, 19-year-old. It kind of speaks for itself, but, he's a guy really patient, press corner, really likes to play at the line of scrimmage, but really smart zone corner as well. Good spatial awareness. He's not the longest guy, but he does use his length really well. Patient feet. Both guys like carry around 1 grades for me. I'm higher on Arnold because I think he's a little bit better of an athlete in things that I value. But in terms of, guys that if they were to take a corner at 20, like, I think that's probably around the range that I'm going to end up having, maybe a little bit earlier than that on Kool-Aid. But Arnold's one of the best defensive prospects in the class for me. So I'd be cool with either one of them being the selection.
Yeah, I do think, maybe it's the Jones fracture. Maybe it's a case of like Terrion being that good or Quinyon Mitchell. Like, I feel like Kool-Aid McKinstry's kind of getting a little bit underrated at this point now, the closer that we get to the draft.
little prospect fatigue, maybe. When you come onto the radar that early, I think you're not the shiny thing anymore, right? And so, Terry and Arnold had and it's not like Kool-Aid tested badly, but there's nothing like headline grabbing, attention getting about the way he's tested. It's basically been what he looked like on tape. And so I think maybe some of that's from the media side, probably, is like we kind of get bored with a guy that we know is good, we've known is good, and nothing really changes. I could see, like, he's a guy that I think actually mocked like near the end of the first round an awful lot, and I think he's going to go higher than that. I think he's probably someone that right now kind of the media is underrating a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think for McKinstry, I think the one reason that when we start talking about guys that are like top 20 prospects in the NFL draft, I feel like the big thing is like a lot of those guys are, special athletes. And, Kool-Aid to me is not one of those like special athletes. I think he's a good athlete, plenty athletic for the position. I just don't know if he has like that athletic trump card like a lot of these guys have. And when I talk to Arnold, the change of direction ability and the click and close ability, like those are special traits. And I'm not sure Kool-Aid really has that because, he does use his length really well, but he's not the longest guy. Like long speed is just like above average to solid. Like he doesn't really pop off the tape in terms of like athletically, but in terms of understanding how to play the cornerback position, very, very refined guy. I think one of the reasons why I think he'll go ahead of somebody like Porter did last year, mainly because, they do have some of the same like grabbiness. He's not as grabby as Porter was, but McKinstry can actually play off the ball. Like he's not super comfortable in a pedal, but he can play off coverage. And I think he's a little bit more well-versed in zone, even though neither one of them are guys that took the football away very often in college. But yeah, really good players. I'm not really surprised that the Steelers have interest there.
Sure. And Derek, I feel like it's so fitting that we're having you on here. We've talked about corners and then we're going to talk about receivers because, like, I feel like those are the two positions that at least you and I talk about the most and love talking about the most, love watching the most. So let's talk about some receivers. Today, they made the Quez Watkins signing official. Van Jefferson has also been added this offseason. I don't consider Cordell Patterson necessarily part of the receiver room, but, like, I guess at times you could see him utilized in the slot or something. But, what is your take on all this? Does this prevent them from drafting a receiver higher than they would, or maybe the idea of double dipping at receiver at least?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it should. Alan, would you agree with me there that it shouldn't change their course?
Maybe on double dipping. Like, I don't know. I think I really want to talk about this, right? Because like this is an offense that has not used its third wide receiver very much over the years. And some years, like not at all. And last year, I think they had 2 tight ends and 2 running backs with more catches than their third wide receiver. And so I don't know. I mean, look, they need depth. Like not like Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson are stopgaps at best. But I think if you lined up with those guys as like wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 in this offense, like it's not good, but just how much those positions are going to be used, especially when you add Cordell Patterson to Najee Harrison and Jalen Warren at running back. I don't know that. I can see that being the plan. I'm not sure it would be my plan, but I could see it being their plan.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that when I went back and watched like kind of both these guys tape, you kind of have to go back to really 2021 with both these guys to find anything of like relevance. I mean, last couple years been really unproductive, but I mean, Van Jefferson to me is, I don't even really know that it's close for me, like in terms of like who I'm more intrigued by, just because I think, with Van Jefferson, he could play inside, outside, good release package. He can get off press, pretty savvy route runner. That's kind of always been like his thing coming out. You go back to 2021, like he was a guy who helped the Rams, stretch the field, particularly off play action, some of those deep shots. I think that could be an area of the, game that I think Arthur Smith would like to use him. In terms of Quez Watkins, I think the big thing that a lot of people, are kind of like excited about is the speed. He has some special teams ability, another guy that can kind of come in and compete in the slot. But just to be completely honest with you, and like I hate talking like super, super bad about somebody's tape, but like I went back and watched 2.5 games of Quez Watkins last year. Some of the worst tape I've ever seen in my life. Like it's just really, really bad, man. Like it has nothing to do with like production or anything like that. He just doesn't play very hard. And I don't know, like he had a hamstring injury early in the season, like week 5. But like, for example, there was times where they would be basically using him as a clear out option to like open space in the intermediate area for like AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. He just lollygagging, like running like 60, 70%. And I just don't, if you're a guy who is gonna, on this team is probably gonna be a guy who, like, there's snaps to be had, right? But definitely not a guy that's guaranteed to make the roster. I'm just curious on like, was this like, is that what was the deal with last year? Because it wasn't just a one game thing. Like even games where he got enough playing time to really make a difference, like just kind of running half speed routes. And the only thing is, like, if your calling card is that you're really fast, if you're not going in the game to like open up things for other people or at least stretch the field and get some targets vertically, like what else are you kind of, providing value for is my thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the intriguing idea, right? Especially as a guy who's going to mostly play in the slot, I think, is that he could be that kind of deep threat out of the slot. But the Steelers have Calvin Austin, right? And so, I mean, I don't know that they're like, I mean, Quez Watkins is bigger, obviously, but it's not like he's physical, I mean, he's probably more physical than Calvin Austin just because of how small Calvin Austin is, but like he's not bringing you like Deebo Samuel stuff out of the slot. He's not bringing you Juju stuff out of the slot, and so it just feels like a weird fit. I don't really like. I don't hate the player. I think he's an NFL player. I'm not sure what their intention with him is, but I mean I do think they have decent depth there now with those three guys. I still think they probably need two wide receivers between now and the start of the season. But if it's just one, it's possible. Like they can play with those guys. I don't think it would go well, but like if you have Jefferson and Watkins as the kind of Allen Robinson type role. I mean, I don't know. I guess look, they're not that much worse than he was last year, right? Like it's not like it's some like off the cliff downgrade.
And I think the big thing for me is like, I think if you squint your eyes the right way, like you could see maybe Van Jefferson being like a wide receiver 3. Like if you say you get the guy, wide receivers, and we could talk some of the options just at the various places in the draft, but say you get the wide receiver that you want in the first couple rounds of the draft, you could squint your eyes and see like, all right, Van Jefferson with the inside-outside versatility, the size, he can stretch the field a little bit. He's inconsistent with his hands, but like a willing blocker, somebody familiar with this system, you can see like that being a good idea. I do agree that I think the big thing is, well, I do agree with what you're saying about like, Van Jefferson, to me, a better player at this stage of his career, even than Allen Robinson was last year. But I do think like, I don't want to sell it short that the Steelers don't necessarily need a one-to-one Diontae Johnson replacement in terms of skill set. Like you're not going to go out and find somebody in this draft that can do the things that he can do in terms of against press coverage or as a route runner, but they still have to replace him on the outside. And I think like the ways that they do that is really intriguing to me because there are all these different flavors or skill sets within the draft. But this is an offense that didn't put up very many points last year. So you got to go get somebody that can, help you and help these new quarterbacks score some touchdowns.
I want to add one thing before we talk about the draft eligible wide receivers and who they're going to bring in that way. The Quez Watkins thing, like Derek, after watching your video, and this could be on me, maybe I was totally wrong in terms of the type of receiver that we were going to see them target for the exact reasons that you both said, just in terms of like the type of player that he is, not necessarily seeing it when the ball's not in his hands, like not seeing the effort, not a great blocker. I'm just like surprised that this is the guy that they were targeting. Like, because we've spent how much time talking about like being a Zach Azzani type receiver, that's the way that he coaches, what he's looking for, the Arthur Smith type offense. Like, it just surprises me, even if you're talking about like lower on the depth chart options, that this is a guy that they were targeting.
I have a really spicy take about someone who I think is somebody that we are not talking about like at all, really, in terms of being a Steeler. A guy that I kind of thought about, no, draft wise.
Oh, okay.
A guy that I think kind of fits that mold in terms of like some of the things that he preaches or I've listened to him talk about is actually Xavier Worthy. And I know that this is going to sound like really repetitive, but they bring in kind of a similar kind of archetype with Watkins to Calvin Austin. I'm comfortable with Calvin Austin as like, I want him on the roster. I think he's like a wide receiver 4 type. He can kind of fill that Khalif Raymond role when I talk about like some of the things that really frustrated me on Watkins tape in terms of like just loafing on routes when he was supposed to be the clear out option, Xavier Worthy, like this is one of my favorite things on his film. Him and AD Mitchell are different in this regard, but there are times where like he's the number 3 on the trip side, and his job is to split those safeties as fast as he can possibly split them. This dude runs, it looks like Roadrunner running down the field. Like he's gonna absolutely blow the top off the defense. And I think just some of the ways that he can create space, not just for himself, but for others, kind of intrigues me a little bit. And, Zach Azzani was at the Texas Pro Day checking out him and AD Mitchell. Yeah. AD Mitchell he's the prototypical Steelers receiver. Super, super talented, very uniquely built, a lot of God-given ability, gets open really in his sleep, effort concerns, some off the field, like maybe some personality stuff there too. Like whatever you think of like what the Steelers typically look for in a receiver, that's AD Mitchell. But I also think that like I don't want to completely dismiss the fact that like if Xavier Worthy was still on the board at like 51, I could easily see them doing that or trading up to get him, just because I think that, his skill set is something that I think that they could even if he doesn't have the body type they typically look for, I could see them having a plan for him.
One thing I want to keep in mind as we go forward and talk about the rest of this draft class, just as it relates to Watkins to Jefferson, Quez Watkins ran a 4.36, Van Jefferson ran a 4.39. These are fast guys. I feel like there has been some themes for some off seasons for the Steelers recently where it just seems like they will take a need and just hammer it. They certainly were not fast and everywhere on the field last year. I mean, you look at some of the guys they brought in on defense too. I think they got, Jackson's one of the faster corners around. Sure seems like that was a focus here, right? Where they were like, hey, I don't know if these guys are good. I don't know if they're playable, but I know they're fast. And so I think that's something interesting to keep in mind when you're looking at some of these draft guys, because it sure seems like that's an area they're looking to significantly upgrade.
Yeah, absolutely. And Derek, I want to ask you, so we've talked about there's not a Diontae Johnson replacement to be had just on the surface right there. But you talk about, they need a wide receiver 2 type of production that could be brought to this offense. Like, so what is the skill set, in your opinion, that they're looking for? Like, what are they missing? And is that in this draft?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, like, we know about the guys that they had formals with at the combine, right? And then we're kind of looking at some of these top 30s that are already reported. So we got Ricky Pearsall, we've got Xavier Legette, Malachi Corley. I mean, those guys to me, like even, and then we talk about some of the other guys, the Texas kids, AD Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU. Those guys are all wildly different skill sets. I mean, you could probably put all six of those guys or 7 of those guys that I just mentioned in 3 different buckets. So that's kind of what I'm really wanting to figure out is like, I haven't really been able to pick up on exactly what it is that they're looking for, because a lot of these guys have just wildly different skill sets. So it's been difficult for me to I don't think that they're looking necessarily for a Diontae Johnson replacement. Like, I don't think they're necessarily looking for an X receiver. I think that's the one thing that I've kind of carried over is I think they're comfortable with getting, like, for example, like if we're talking like Xavier Legette from South Carolina, he's going to be a guy that when they go 2 wide receivers, he'll probably be the Z. You motion him into stacks, you use him on drag routes, crossers. And then when you spread out and go 11 personnel, he's probably like a power slot type. I think that's kind of the vision for a guy like him. Pearsall, same thing, kind of a Z when you're in, 2 wide receiver sets or you use him in stacks, can also be a slot, really good route runner. I don't know really what the archetype that they're really looking for. I think it's going to be interesting to see. I don't see like a pure theme, Right. I think the only real true like X receiver that the only true X receiver that they've shown a ton of interest in, I feel like, is AD Mitchell. So I think it's going to be a Z or a slot.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that's what they need, and that's okay. But even within the Z's and the slots, like there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of variation in body type and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like they could go any number of different directions, which also does sort of leave open the idea that they could take more than one, right? Like maybe they're looking for 2 body types from this group. I kind of have these guys broken down into some tiers. I kind of want to go over that with you, Derek, especially, and just see, like, first of all, if you kind of agree with where I've got them, and then, like, if you see some value that stands out to you. And so I think we can agree that Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze are not going to be on the board when the Steelers draft at 20, or even if they trade up a little bit, like, those guys are long gone, right? For me, for number 20, I kind of feel like it's Brian Thomas or nobody. I mean, I'm not necessarily 100% sure that he'll be there, but I don't think that anybody else really rises to the level. Maybe A.D. Mitchell would, but I just have a hard time seeing him being the pick, considering the corners and the tackles that we talked about that are going to be there and the depth of this wide receiver class. Is there anybody else that you see as a realistic option at number 20? Because to me, that's kind of it.
Yeah, I would say those two guys. Thomas is a really interesting player just because, what he was asked to do in that LSU offense is really elementary. But this is a dude, like, unbelievable acceleration, long speed, go ball winner. I mean, last year alone, I think I've said this stat like several times on different mediums, but I want to say on go balls last year, I think he had 12 catches, 500 plus yards, and like double-digit touchdowns. I mean, that's just off running in a straight line. That's how dominant he was on a vertical plane last year. They didn't ask him to do much more than that, but I was, intrigued by he got a lot better last year against press coverage. Is able to go high point the football, even though it's not all the way consistent. He had a better plan for press than I originally anticipated, or I even gave him credit for the first time I watched him. So I ended up moving him up in my rankings after the combine, really, and it didn't have anything to do about his testing because, I mean, we all knew he was a size, speed, weight freak. But Mitchell's a guy, like, I've already kind of planted my flag on A.D. Mitchell this cycle. It's either going to be one of two things. Like, he's going to end up being kind of like what Pickens is. He'll probably go a little later than he should, and everybody's going to look around. It's like, dude, this dude's incredibly talented. He lands in the right situation. He's just going to be he's going to be a wide receiver one for the next 10 years, and he's going to put up all these numbers and all these touchdowns. Or the other thing that's going to happen is he lands in the wrong spot, and he just completely flames out because, like, maybe he doesn't like football, or maybe he just never puts it together in terms of, like, bringing it on every single play. But when I watch this dude play, I mean, he's just open nonstop. And, like, you just don't see guys at his size, over 6'2", over 200 pounds. You don't see guys this loose, this flexible. I mean, I talked a lot about how much I like Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold and a lot of those Alabama DBs. They couldn't check him last year. I mean, he did Kool-Aid McKinstry so dirty in the red zone multiple times. They just couldn't. And then I think that just the quarterback situation at Texas just was not an ideal fit for him or Worthy's skill set. Now, I do have concerns about, like, he's not the greatest after the catch. Doesn't really matter to me in terms of, like, projecting him to an X receiver at the next level. But my more concern is, like, what's the reason for him just, like, kind of taking some of these plays off when he's not really necessarily the first or second read in the progression? Like, I don't know if there is a good reason for it. But I look at a guy, like, in terms of guys that can line up, and this is where I think, like, Diontae's always had, like, really good value that people haven't given him credit for. But if you're, like, in a 3-by-1 formation, backside, you got your X receiver, and that dude's normally going to be pressed up on the line of scrimmage with a safety over top. Guys that can go out there and get their own buckets by themselves. You don't need motion. You don't need no stacks, no rub routes, nothing. Guys that can go out there and just get open 90% of the time as route runners are incredibly valuable. And Mitchell does that in his sleep. So I just think that the projection there is really easy for me as long as he really likes football. And I would take him at 20 in a heartbeat if I was the Steelers.
Real quick, I just want to add, I have him as wide receiver 4 above Brian Thomas Jr. NFL.com's player comp, by the way, George Pickens.
See, I think they're different players, but I do
more like
see
Diontae than George, honestly.
There are some of the same kind of things where, like, George in college, he would only really, like, he still does it with the Steelers. He really only runs, like, fast about maybe 7 or 8 or out of 10 routes. And Mitchell's kind of the same way, but they win a little differently. George is more dominant at the catch point. Mitchell's just a more refined route runner. I also think he's got a little more juice vertically, but I mean, in terms of, like, you want a really exciting young dynamic duo on the outside to kind of build around. I mean, I think that the Steelers are really interested. I just don't know if they're going to pull the trigger at 20. We can kind of talk about some of the options on day 2. But that's they've always kind of addressed that need and that position on day 2 of the draft. I just don't think Mitchell's going to make it anywhere close to. He shouldn't make it anywhere close to, like, where they can even, like, get him on day 2.
I agree. And I have like 4 other guys on this list that I think they're not going to get to 50. Like maybe they're trade back options, maybe they're trade up options, but they're not going to get to the Steelers' second round pick. And that's Worthy, we talked a lot about. Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, and Troy Franklin. Coleman and Franklin were combine formals for the Steelers. Ladd McConkey, they saw at the Senior Bowl, and Mike Tomlin was his pro day. So these are guys they're doing their due diligence on. I just look at the way the draft board falls. It's like they're like 10 picks from the Steelers either way, no matter what.
I have a take on this before Derek goes. Out of those names that you said, the names that we're going to talk about afterwards, I would rather have any of those as opposed to I like McConkey and I'd be okay with Worthy. Coleman I wouldn't want, and who was Troy Franklin. I like the other ones more. Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Legette. Malachi
Well, they're
Corley.
different kinds of guys, and I think it goes back to the archetype conversation, right? Like if you want a Keon Coleman, there isn't another one of those coming up later for a while, right? Like,
yeah.
But is that what they want?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that you mentioned a couple guys that I feel like I'm lower on the consensus. I think McConkey's interesting. I don't do a lot of player comps just because I feel like a lot of times when people are doing them and you see people put out their rankings, even guys that like really do their homework, they just kind of like everybody has to have a comp, and it's just I don't really see it. But I know McConkey's McConkey's a guy that's gotten some Diontae Johnson comparisons. So I mean, you could see maybe like if they are looking for a replacement for Diontae, I think the biggest difference there is McConkey's a guy who against press coverage like just isn't as on time with his releases. He's a guy who has really quick feet, but will have some wasted movement. And like I feel like a lot of people are admitting that he's a really great separator, great route runner, really crisp, but he's a guy who if you get your hands on him, the play's over. I mean, like that just is what it is. And like if you're projecting a guy who can play outside, like you've got to be absolutely dominant. And I think he is a really good player, a top 50 player to me. But that's the only concern I have in terms of like him living on the outside is, when guys did get their hands on him, the rep was pretty much over just because like he doesn't have the ability to play through contact through the route stem or at the top of the route. But you talk about a guy who can get open. I mean, this dude can route up anybody. Double moves are crazy. Just wasn't overly productive, and some of that was like injury related, which I think is noteworthy when you're talking about a smaller receiver dealing with some minor kind of dinged up situations where he exited the game early. But yeah, I mean, those guys to me, I think Worthy is kind of like a sleeper like guy because like I don't really know how the NFL is going to value him. I think he's going to go high. We just don't see a lot of 160-pound receivers. I mean, it's just he's a historical outlier, obviously with the speed too. But he's a guy who needs a really good situation. I mean, I think if he lands with a guy like, if he goes out there and lands with like Josh Allen or something like that, or in Miami, like we're all probably saying this is the worst thing that could ever happen to the NFL. or he could land in like, a really bad situation with a bad quarterback. And like, we could say, why in the world would you ever take this dude in the first round?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Keon Coleman, I think, is like if you want a 6'4" gigantic guy, like that's the one you got to take. There just aren't that many of them. It's all projection though. Like he doesn't have that much production, and he certainly has like big flaws in his game. What do you think about Troy Franklin and how he might fit in? I mean, I don't know. To me, he's a guy that I think I agree. I think I'm a lot lower on than the consensus is, but he feels like someone that a lot of people really like.
Yeah, Franklin to me is he's an interesting guy because he's not what you really think of when you see these like string bean kind of wide receivers that are built like him. You kind of just anticipate that they're just going to be this kind of straight line wide receiver. He's not really that. Like he is like this dude does know how to get open. He can create space for himself at the top of routes. That's something that I really like. He is a hands catcher. He likes to catch the ball away from his frame. There's some really good examples of him catching the ball in like slants and stuff over the middle, kind of extending beyond his frame and then transition into a wide receiver. His route tree wasn't like the most diverse, but I don't really have very much concern there, to be honest. He's a build-up speed guy. He's not like overly explosive off the ball, but like he does have a really, really nice third gear. Things with Franklin is some of his production, like I don't want to call it fake because this dude, I mean, he was a dude that we were talking about last year on some pods and stuff, but like some of his longer touchdowns this season, some of the worst defensive play you will ever see. Like against USC,
Dude.
he had an early touchdown on the first or second drive of the game where he caught a in-breaker over the middle, and the safety took the worst angle. I mean, it has nothing to do with like his athleticism, but he ended up with like 75 yards and a touchdown off of the worst angle I've ever seen a safety take.
There are a lot of
USC defense.
There are a lot of Pac-12 offensive players that can get drafted in this draft, and I don't know. I've seen a lot of that.
I've told people you can't anything that happened against USC last year. You can't take it into account. Like I've seen a bunch of people like Latu from UCLA. Like one of the most fun pass rush evals you'll ever do. This dude has a bag so deep, like Santa's bag is the type of pass rush move this dude has. But like people have been posting clips over the past like 2 weeks, and I DM somebody because like he had like 15 pressures against USC. I mean, USC couldn't block him. They were trying to double him, slide the protection. They couldn't block him. And I literally sent this to somebody 2 days ago. I was like, I can't take people serious that are like posting like highlight clips against USC, like as if we didn't see Williams running for his life last year. But you mentioned Keon Coleman. This is the player I'm most different than the consensus on than like anyone in the entire draft, not just receivers, but Coleman to me, like the most disappointing tape watch of the entire cycle. Like not what receiver base, like
it's all the physical traits. The tapes not good.
I couldn't even put him like I was literally talking to Nick Martin about this yesterday or 2 days ago, but he didn't even make my top 10 wide receivers, and like he really wasn't that close to 10 either. Like it was he just
in top 15.
It's looking like he's not going to be there, but I am willing to give him one more chance because I popped on the Duke game this morning, and then I asked 2 different people about his best game that I needed to go that wasn't Purdue. So I'm going to go back and watch one more game to give him another chance. But I mean, I have really just the things that I value that I think really translate to the NFL. You have to be able to separate some. Like you don't necessarily have to be an elite separator. You don't need to be Ladd McConkey. You don't need to be Diontae Johnson. You don't even need to be like A.D. Mitchell. You like a guy like Xavier Legette, like to me is always a guy who's never going to be like this super twitched up and elite change of direction guy who's going to create a ton of separation as a route runner. But you can at least see him get open because like he has that vertical straight line speed. Coleman doesn't have that. Like he's not overly explosive and he's not a good route runner. So other than being really athletic and he can go up and get the ball, like he's got an excellent vertical leaping ability, some of the most acrobatic catches that you've ever seen. I think he's got good hands. But outside of that, like if you're not consistently open at all and guys are always draped on your back, like quarterbacks are going to stop throwing the ball to you. That's just how it is. And there's just not very many guys. Like if you look at the top receivers in the league, there's just not many guys like winning like that in today's NFL. So I think it's just going to get phased out
because that like 15 years ago, I think he'd have been like a top 15 pick. I'm not saying he would have turned out great, but I think you would look at the size and the speed and somebody would have taken that guy. But I think we've learned a little bit about like the value of separation and he certainly does not have that.
And like people, I don't want to keep going back to Diontae, but like it's just a really good example of people always question, like even last year when Diontae was in the lineup, well, like why does he get why like when he's in the lineup does he get double-digit targets even if he's not overly efficient? This and that. It's like, but quarterbacks like throwing to guys that are wide open, man. Like if you're a quarterback and you know that somebody's going to have 2 yards of separation in the league, it's extremely valuable. With Coleman, every situation where he was one-on-one, I felt like it was just contested catch city. And I know that Jordan Travis has some accuracy issues, and we could have a whole different podcast about that. But
we will.
So like, Travis himself created some of those really bad contested catch situations. That's why I'm not worried about the contested catch numbers that Pro Football Focus has on him. He only came up with like 10 or 30 contested catches, but some of these are just so bad, such bad throws. But I just don't see a consistent enough separation.
Like Sports Center top 10 kind of.
Yeah, and I just to me, I just think that if you're taking a top 50 player, you know, I'm lower on him than that. But if you're taking a top 50 player, especially in this class with so many guys who get open on a regular basis, I'm out at that. I'm out at that rate.
Does his frame and the Steelers offense that is going to ask wide receivers to block, it seems like a lot.
He's a good blocker.
Matter to you?
He is a good blocker.
Yeah,
I will say that.
Like, would that be like if you're looking at like Troy Franklin, who's very small, and Keon Coleman? I mean, obviously, I think I like Troy Franklin better, but like within the lens of the Arthur Smith offense, does that change your mind at all?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned Troy Franklin. Like I was watching a little bit.
Worthy's pretty small too,
I
right?
put some I
Yeah.
put some clips on Franklin up this morning on my Twitter. But yeah, I mean Franklin's a guy too. Like his effort, like the effort's there. Like I don't think he's like some crazy effort guy, but like the effort's there. It's just he's a net negative in the blocking game. I mean, he just like the play strength and just his frame just allows him to get pushed around like that. Coleman's not like that. Like Coleman does play hard in the run game. Like I felt like there was definitely a couple games that I watched where he helped spring some big runs by Trey Benson, their running back. But so I do like that. And the other thing with Coleman, like I'm still going to be in on Coleman. Like if you wanted to take him in this class, I feel like in the third round, particularly late, I could get on board with that type of range. I know that's a lot lower than the consensus, but the one thing with Keon is like he's still extremely young. Like he's only 20. Like I think he's only 20 or maybe just turned 21 years
And
old.
he didn't play that much either.
Yeah. So
he only had like 3 or 4 games that first year.
Yeah, been really bad quarterback situation, like or not ideal quarterback situations for his skill set. So I don't know, man. I just don't see like the lower body flexibility to like really improve a ton as a route runner. And if you're just not overly explosive.
I wonder if somebody will try to turn him into the world's biggest slot receiver. I could maybe
He
see
played
that.
a little, he did play a little bit in the slot this past year for Florida State. I just think like I think that some of the comparisons that Xavier Legette is getting are kind of wild. Like I don't see those comparisons at all. But I just think like if you're asking me like who I would rather have like tomorrow, I don't really think it's not really a comparison for me. I'd rather have Legette. And that's even me saying that like I think that the AJ Brown comparisons for Legette are like really, really bad. Like really, really bad. But yeah, I don't know. I struggle with Coleman, man, because like I said, the tape was just it was disappointing. It really hurt my heart because I was tweeting about him before the season, man. I was like, man, this is a dude that can go first round. And then I sat there and watched the tape, and I'm like, this is awful.
Yeah, it's just all projection. It's all physical size, strength, and can you turn this into something? Because what is there is not that good. We're already like 40 minutes. We want to carry this over into another conversation. How do we want to move forward here, Smitty?
I feel like though, with the way that we talked about, we got to talk about this at least like last group.
All right, well, let me get these 5 guys I've got here circled as to me that feel like options at 50, and that's Xavier Legette, Roman Wilson, Ricky Pearsall, Jalen Polk, Malachi Corley. I think maybe not all those guys would be like necessarily like the best value for 50, but particularly those first 3 guys seem like they're very tightly clustered right around that Steelers second round pick. Talked about Legette a little bit. I like all these guys. I would take any of these guys. I think they can all start day one in the NFL. I think the Steelers are especially blessed. Well, you're looking at like this is why I think they're taking a tackle or a corner in the first round, because I look at this pack of second round receivers and go, there's a starter, there's another starter, there's no reason to rush on wide receiver. Derrick, am I talking crazy about the depth here, and what stands out to you about this group?
Yeah, I mean, Legette, I just wrote about him for the site, did his draft profile yesterday. So you can go check out like a lot of stuff on him on Steelers Now. But I mean, I already kind of talked about how I envision him, a guy who has the speed and explosiveness to take short throws to the house. I mean, he had like a 75, 76-yard touchdown on a drag route, I think, last season against Mississippi State. Excellent at the catch point, good timing, understanding how to use his frame, leaper. Like one of the things about Legette that I think is just kind of crazy is like you'll watch him in these contested catch situations when the ball's in the air. He almost looks like he extends and then freeze frames at the top of like at the apex of his jump and just like hangs in the air longer than everybody else. It kind of looks like some of those like Michael Jordan Space Jam clips where he's just like kind of hanging in there with guys draped on him. I don't think, he is relatively unrefined for a guy who spent 5 years in college. I mean, there's reasons for his delayed breakout. He lost both of his parents as a teenager. So huge special teams value too. So like, he's a guy who, in my opinion, won't completely bust. Like, even if he can't get on the field as a receiver, like, and he just doesn't pan out like that, like, he's going to be a really good special teamer. Pearsall is a guy who, like, I was, like, extremely high on whenever I got around to his film, like, before the Senior Bowl. And, like, I feel like the consensus is largely caught up. His stock has went through the roof, especially after he tested like a freak at the Combine. But, just a really, really deceptive route runner. Excellent body control. I love his hands. Has made some of the most like awesome, off target catches that I really saw this entire cycle. Just feels like a guy who's going to get consistently open and be a really good slot receiver and like number 2, number 3 option for a really long time. Who was other guys you mentioned? Jalen Polk,
Roman Wilson, and then Malachi Corley.
Yeah, so like Jalen Polk would probably be he's my highest rated guy out of those 3 guys. Polk is really good. Like Polk's one of those guys who doesn't have a trump card. Like he doesn't do anything extremely well, but he does everything good enough or like everything solid and really good hands, like catch point he can win vertically, but he does it a little bit differently with more like deception. Not really a pure speed guy or a great athlete in my opinion, but he had an awesome season. I would throw another guy in there that I really like that I would kind of throw into maybe not at 52, but like if they were to say like trade back a little bit from this spot, kind of maybe like 5-10 picks and grab another day 3 selection. Jalen McMillan from Washington. He's a guy who like I have kind of around that top 50. I think that people are really sleeping on him because I think if you go back and watch the 2022 tape, the way that he can win at all 3 levels, stretch the field, excellent ball tracking, can do a little bit of run after catch. This is another guy who like choice routes. You need him to get open out of the slot. He can do it. He can play outside, in my opinion, too, as like a Z. Those would be the guys I'd be kind of interested in a little bit.
Roman Wilson to me was a guy that like at the Senior Bowl really like turned my head. I had obviously seen a good amount of Michigan, but I don't know. They just don't ever throw the ball. And when they did, they always did it from such advantageous down and distance situations that I think it made him makes his tape a tough evaluation. But man, that I love what I saw in Mobile. He tested really well, ran a 4.38 or 4.39, I think, and ran his RIS player comp, number 1 guy on the list, Emmanuel Sanders. So, I mean, but he doesn't even feel like Emmanuel Sanders. They're small, right? And Roman Wilson is a smaller guy, but he's like tough and physical in a way that like Emmanuel Sanders never was. I don't know. I really like him as a player. He feels like a Steeler to me. What are your thoughts about him?
Yeah, I think Wilson, like the thing that I kept coming back to too was like the toughness for a guy with his frame. Like that was really the big thing for me is I felt like he was incredibly tough. Like when they would ask him to run up the seam or do those kind of middle field read routes or anytime he had to go over the middle, like he's willing to extend beyond his frame. He'll take hits. He's just tough as nails. And I kept coming back to it and say like, man, I wish he was just like 2 inches taller and had a little like extra like 10, 15 pounds on his frame. And I'd be probably a little bit more high on him. My thing with Wilson is like, I didn't really see a extremely detailed route runner. I thought he was all right in that regard. I was expecting more in terms of like separation ability. I think he's a fine player, but he has more of like a 3rd round grade for me. The other guy that I kind of, it hurts my soul because it doesn't hurt my soul like Keon Coleman because I had much higher expectations for him, but I like Malachi Corley, and I think that I wrote an article like before the Senior Bowl that I thought the Steelers are going to show interest in him. This is before they even named an offensive coordinator. I was like, they need a guy that can like get yards after the catch, that they can throw the ball underneath. And at this point in time, like Corley was a 3rd round, 4th round pick. And I was like, okay, I see it. Like the Steelers are going to have a need receiver. Now I think on the consensus board, I want to say Corley's like in the 50s or 60s.
67.
He's 67. It's just too rich for my blood, man. Like he's so unrefined as a route runner, does not have like any idea on really how to set defenders up, doesn't create consistent separation. They didn't ask him to do a lot. I mean, he had like 70 something targets on screens last year. I mean, all of his production was just throwing the ball to him underneath and like let him go make plays after the catch. And I think he's really good at that. I just think that like people have like cloned him to Deebo Samuel. And I think that the idea there is fine. Like he's got some moments where he's just excellent play strength, contact balance, like as a runner. But people don't understand, like it's the offensive coordinators are not just throwing guys out there that you can take on day 2 of the draft and spend a top 100 pick. They're not putting guys out there just to like throw them screens. Like that's just if that's the only thing that you can do. And I'm not saying that is like there's some ball tracking ability to him too, but I just think he's extremely raw as a route runner. Almost like he's really physical. So I think this maybe plays into his mentality a little bit, but he's just like way too comfortable letting cornerbacks just drape him, like get their hands on him all over his frame. Like and he just doesn't really win like that. So I have some concerns with him. He was outside my top 15 receivers. I know that he's another guy that I'm probably going to be lower on the consensus now, which sucks because I really like Corley as a player and I'm rooting for him, especially as a Western guy. But yeah, I would, if they picked him at 52, I would be extremely concerned about what the offense will look like next year. Just like full disclosure. So if that does happen, y'all can tune into my Twitter account because I'll probably be like getting yelled at. Everybody will be cussing me out saying I don't know anything and all this stuff. But I will be extremely concerned if that's the pick at 52.
There we go. Great conversation.
I think there's more meat on this bone, so I think we're going to come back to this as soon as we can. But I think that was a pretty awesome job of setting up where the Steelers stand at wide receiver and what the outlook is for the early part of this draft.
Yeah, and of course, as we mentioned, like Derrick's going to be on here throughout the month leading up to the draft, so we'll get him back on here. Longer afternoon drive than normal. I think we hit some road work along the way or something. We had to take a detour that caused us to take a little bit of a longer afternoon drive. But Derrick, tell the people where they can find you.
Yep, at Steelers_DB, Twitter, YouTube, and all my written works on SteelersNow.com.
I think most people that are watching this are familiar with that site, but what say you, Alan? Where can the people find you?
SteelersNow.com, and
okay,
that's pretty much it.
Okay, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here, hit us in the comments, let us know your thoughts. Who are you eyeing in this wide receiver class? Let us know how you feel about where we've talked about these players, where they fit, the scheme fits, all that good stuff. Leave us a 5-star review if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. I'm Zachary Smith, PGH, for Alan Saunders, for Derrick Bell, and myself. Thanks for jumping in. Take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.